You cut rates for the first time in November in 16 months. Are we expecting another rate cut this month?
I'm not sure about that. We'll need to look at all the data. But what is clear is back in November, we had rates caps for 3 years, and those were removed. So suddenly, we liberalized, as it were, monetary policy, and therefore we have ability to maneuver. We have room to maneuver. At the last meeting, the Monetary Policy Committee did say that there is room for more accommodative policy, monetary policy, mainly because the fiscal policy was contracting. And also the economy was, there was an output gap. So there was a bit of slack in the economy. So that was the assessment of the Monetary Policy Committee last time. And let's see what the assessment will be next week.
Of course, economists are pretty divided, and there are no longer those interest caps. Under what circumstances, in your opinion, would drive another cut?
Another cut would generally be if indeed there is still some output gaps, in the economy, that there's a lot of slack. And also they would look and see if the effectiveness of the last rates cut. The last cut, the last monetary policy action. So that's really what we need to check. And if indeed there is scope in terms of the space, and also the last cuts have worked themselves, or they've been working themselves as was expected, then I think there may be scope for additional cuts.
The IMF has sounded a note of caution when it comes to the debt in the country. It thinks that the government is, I guess, raising too much debt. How concerned are you about it?
Our debt level at this moment is around 62% of GDP. And I think the increase in debt over the last few years was mainly to finance significant infrastructure spending. And so from that perspective, I think the first question is the efficiency of the projects themselves. And did those projects deliver what was expected? That, I think, is the first question. But in terms of debt financing for additional projects or additional capital investments, there is less room. And I've made the point that we don't have much headroom for additional debt financing. What we need to look at is more of other forms of financing. PPPs come to mind, but the other forms of financing that do not create debt. And I think the issue for us is also how to energize the economy so that we can increase the economy's repayment capacity, both in terms of revenues, government revenues, or for that matter, in terms of foreign exchange earnings, if indeed the payments are external.
So how can the government raise revenue? It is struggling at this point in time.
It is struggling, but I think the issue here is a transformation issue. You see, transformation is much more than just a single economic moment. And it takes a lot more action. And I think this is what has been happening in the revenue collection area. They need to strengthen revenues. They know that. But how they do that and how long it takes for their measures to create additional revenues is something that obviously we are watching carefully. But at this moment, the measures have been well articulated. More importantly, they are articulating the expenditure side of the equation. And that has always been a concern. And I think, as you can imagine, we have a lot more demands on expenditures. And so the prudence there and in terms of prioritization is essential.
There is a budget shortfall. Are you expected to issue Eurobonds?
At this moment, the budget is being reconsidered, meaning there's a proposal that will be sent to Parliament. But I think the point here is that the deficit that they are predicting, meaning they are they are reducing the targeted deficit. And I don't think this is something that should be of concern. The contrary, it should be accepted and indeed welcomed with open arms. As I have said, from our perspective in the central bank, we have looked at this and actually seen that it is believable. What they are putting together is believable, and therefore there will be a sort of a switch in policy from sort of a very, let's say, accommodative fiscal stance to a much more, let's say, less accommodative fiscal stance. And this is why we will get a rebalancing, as I mentioned a moment ago.